Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Welcome to the latest episode of Sgwrs. And in this episode we're exploring the national mission for education within Wales, which includes achieving high standards and aspirations for all by tackling the impact of poverty on educational ambition and attainment. To do that, we're joined today by Amy Lear, Head of English, and James Emery, School Librarian at Fitzalan Comprehensive in Cardiff. If you're not familiar with the setting, it's an 11 to 18 secondary school with just over 1,800 pupils in total, 350 of which are in the sixth form. It's situated in the Leckwith area of Cardiff and serves a very diverse community, with just under 25% of pupils having English as an additional language, and the percentage of pupils on roll who are eligible for free school meals is 38%, so that's not too far away from double the national average of 21%. With all of this in mind, Fitzalan has developed effective approaches to raise standards and aspirations for all, many of which centre around reading, and many of which have been recognised in their latest Estyn report. To talk about some of those things, we're really delighted to welcome Amy and James to Sgwrs. Welcome both. Could we start by just setting some of the context to your work around literacy and around reading in particular? Could you tell us a bit about the challenges and priorities at Fitzalan as you see them? Amy,
do you want to go
first?
Okay. So as you mentioned, the diversity within our school is a wonderful aspect of the school. Culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, but with that comes challenges in terms of raising reading as a whole school priority and making sure that books are in the hands of our young people. Of course, as well, you mentioned the FSM in our school being 38%. With that income cap being 7,400 a year as well, obviously we have a lot of families that perhaps don't prioritise putting a book or going out and getting books with the cost of books into the hands of their young people. So we are working with a number of pupils under the poverty line, and that is a challenge obviously for the school in our high aspirations and high standards. An additional challenge, again, as you alluded to in the introduction, is that a huge number of our pupils have English as a second language, and perhaps not going home to homes that are speaking English or listening to English on the television, or things that perhaps our English as a first language pupils do. So again, that is something that we're looking and we have always looked to address.
James, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. I'd add, we're part of the national discourse so the National Literacy Trust just revealed a huge big survey of attitudes towards reading. And the amount of time that students across the whole country spend reading is at its lowest it's kind of ever been. It's come down from 60% in 2016 down to 30%. And likewise, those who actually state that they enjoy reading in their spare time, that's also gone down to the lowest ever level, which kind of tracks with maybe the rise of alternative forms of entertainment and social media and TikTok and things. We are somewhat battling for students' headspace in that regard.
I thought it was really interesting as well, Amy, that you used the phrase a couple of times, that idea of putting the books in the hands of readers and really focusing on books as kind of physical objects as well. Is that something, James, that really touches on your work as a school librarian?
I think it's really important because, as I said, a book doesn't require a battery, doesn't require charging. It can be in a bag, it's quite resilient, stuffed in there with wet towels and sports kit and things, it survives. And it does mean that we're giving every student the opportunity to get that book out at home, whereas I know some schools they read on Chromebooks, right? And that's a little bit trickier to do because access to Wi-Fi and computers at home is a little bit kind of harder to come by. Whereas a book, for everything it gives a student, is a relatively low cost thing to give them to improve their entertainment and enjoyment of reading.
Amy, back to you.
And of course, the romance of having that book in the hand with everything being so digitized and pupils used to having those things in their hands. I think it really is important for pupils who are reading for pleasure to have that sort of experience of having that book in their hands, definitely.
And it is interesting when you look at Book Talk and everyone, like so many influencers are like flicking through their books on their social media channels. It can go hand in hand with the technology, but it's only when the technology overtakes it is when it becomes a bit of a problem, I think.
Yeah, so it's a really live conversation, isn't it, about the retention levels of reading on screen versus reading physical print, and the importance of that, the tangibility of the page, and even that experience of page turning, sometimes being able to annotate. Yeah, it's a very live conversation. And you mentioned, James, the sort of National Literacy Trust and their findings. Was there anything else that kind of fed into your thinking, or anything else that inspired your work around reading?
Well, I've worked in sort of public libraries for nearly 20 years and school libraries for the last 8 years. And just like, I don't know, I just really, what that feeling of when you go into like a bookshop, sometimes school libraries can be a little bit forgotten or like passed up a little bit. And I want to create a school library, get that feeling where the books are fresh and they're new and they're speaking to the students. And I feel like that can be quite inspirational, even if the students aren't going to openly admit it. They will sort of kind of find reading more pleasurable if you can provide them with the great materials they deserve. I think like I really, you know, over all my years seeing like the different books that are in different libraries and in different bookshops and things, I want everyone to experience the most wide-ranging, diverse stories they possibly can.
James has done a huge amount of work on representation in our library as well, and that idea of walking into a library and picking up books that represent you as a person and represent the culture or the ethnicity or the values, all of the things that are important to see yourself as the protagonist in a text. And James has done an absolutely mammoth job in making sure that is represented in our library.
Yeah, so I will say, like, when I first started 2 years ago here, and we did a big audit of everything, catalogued everything, and added tags to every book just in case if they had a diverse author or a diverse character or a main character. And of our like 6,500 books, we found that only 6% of our stock featured a character who wasn't white, and it was just kind of like, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily speaking to our audience as a school, but it was only really by undertaking that mammoth audit that we really started to realize and unpick that data, and sort of like an archaeologist going through and kind of figuring out, okay, well, how have we got to this point and what can we do to rectify it? Because without that data, it's hard to ask for money towards this valuable resource if you're like, I feel like we need some books. So if I can say we have this massive problem where our students aren't being represented, we need to fix this problem.
That's really interesting. And do you think learners responded to that? Like, I suppose at first, the fact that they maybe couldn't see themselves in the text that were in the library, and then with the changes you've made, have you sort of seen an impact before and after, would you say?
Well, we are in the process. So I've had a big end of year audit, which has been great, but I'm sort of cataloging a lot of those now. So next year will be the year where like loads and loads and loads of books sweep the shelves, and our percentage is going to go up to about 30%. And I feel like even if the students don't vocalize it, I think they will hopefully just when they're browsing the shelves be more inclined to maybe pick up a book, or maybe like, I don't know, inwardly just feel like, oh, I'm being seen here, I'm being represented here on these shelves. These shelves do speak to me, and that's something we can like back up with a pupil voice. We can sort of send out a survey and sort of ask the students what their thoughts on the library are and what kind of areas of text are missing, so we get their input into it as well.
I also have to say that conversations in classes. We will notice now that pupils will be talking about a range of books, and it's not just those sort of authors that hit the shelves because their marketing is so much more prevalent than perhaps some of the lesser known authors that are coming with the new neurodiverse books, etc. And I also have to say that in our primary schools as well, we have invited primary schools in, and their libraries seem so much more representative than they used to be. So there's definitely a huge conversation around diversity and representation, and it's something that I think is a massive credit to Cardiff schools in particular.
I agree with that a lot. Yeah, I agree. I think like a lot of librarians, the money is hard to come by. But as you say, a lot of librarians I speak to in a little librarians group, and they're picking up books in the charity shops and they're picking up things, but you're not going to find those diverse texts. You're going to find, like Amy said, like your David Volumes, your Dive Wimpy Kids, which is fine. But where are you finding those actual texts, those good high quality ones? And you just have to buy them. You just have to buy them, really.
So to pick up on a couple of things you've said then, so like the importance of making that kind of business case almost, and that's based on some quite hard data, and being able to make that really strong case to budget holders, that came across really strongly. And then also that social aspect of reading, like really interesting to hear, the importance of conversations and those corridor chats about what people are reading. That I think sometimes can get lost, can't it, in where we perhaps gravitate towards silent, independent reading, that sometimes that social aspect of reading and the excitement around text that kind of comes through so clearly from both of you can get lost. Yeah, James.
Because when the students, they have a bit of independence to come to the desk. I know some schools they don't quite let people out in lesson to go to the library. We have a sort of ticket system where they write their names down on a little laminated ticket, so we know it's like an out of class ticket with their name on, with the kind of books they're looking for. But when they come to the desk, it's always about like having that interaction. It's kind of like teaching soft skills. Like these year sevens might not really go to the shops and pay for things. It might be their parents who do that. But in the library, they come to the desk and they've picked their book, and we have a small conversation. It can be brief, can be long, but it's about, oh, you've picked a horror book. Oh, okay. Remember, no screaming in class when you get scared. It's just having a bit of fun with them, and they come to the desk and just letting them know, reinforcing the kind of books they're choosing, because they are kind of figuring out what they like and what they don't like.
There's nothing more heartwarming as a teacher of a language when you're walking along a corridor and you're sort of saying, you are going to have to look where you're going, otherwise you're going to walk into a wall or something, and they've got their nose in a book. And I walked through our library earlier, and James had a gaggle of pupils around him and a book open, and they were gasping, and they were I'm not sure what the book was, James, but it's lovely to see such animated pupils around books and the content of the books, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just such a strong mental picture to have of corridors full of readers and libraries full of readers. And then more broadly, do you feel, Amy, that those attitudes and those conversations are sort of translating into the English classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do as a school in our English lessons, we afford our pupils the time at the beginning of the lesson to read their book that they get from the library. And that's huge in the conversations that happen. And then pupils are reminded of the experience, the themes in their book, and that might happen to come into the lesson. It might not, or it might then be a conversation on a different day. It's all those things that as readers we know and we love and we recognize are the real sort of treasures, being able to link those things, but seeing it happen firsthand with our pupils is really illuminating and can be sort of the treasures of the day, I suppose.
It does, yeah. It feels very precious, doesn't it? I think certainly, like, we are enthusiasts, aren't we, of reading. It's it's fed into the roles that we have now, but sort of generationally, and as you kind of alluded to earlier, James, generationally and culturally, there's an awful lot that reading of quality fiction has got to compete with now, which really was sort of the inspiration for this conversation, this podcast. So if you don't mind, I'd quite like just to read out the Estyn spotlight on the school's work creating a reading culture, because I think there's an awful lot to unpack within that. So the spotlight itself says, all pupils benefit from the whole school prioritisation of reading and the development of a strong reading culture. This is underpinned robustly by suitable book recommendations, role models among teaching staff, and regular reading time in form periods and within a dedicated library space. By covering many subject areas, including social issues outside of school, pupils learn to appreciate that reading has a place in many aspects of life and helps them develop as well-rounded individuals, receptive to new ideas. So there's so much to sort of unpack, I think, about that statement, and it's such a sort of rich testament to your work. And one of those phrases that stands out for me is that whole school prioritisation. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about? Because it can be very challenging, I think, can't it, to make reading a whole school focus and to get that buy-in?
Yeah, like you say, it's a huge multifaceted approach, really, that stems from a lot of hard work, and it would be remiss not to mention, our senior leaders that lead on the whole school priorities such as reading. So Rachel Steed, our assistant head teacher, Reese Hopkins, the deputy, and Paige Franklin, the skills leader, in the development of our whole school reading approach. So things like accountable reading strategies that were key foci across the school. They were embedded through staff training and guidance. One thing that I think was particularly successful is having that sort of check-in weekly. On a Friday morning, we'd have a briefing where people would, where members of staff would present on what they were doing for accountable reading within their subjects. So it's very powerful when the head of PE, for example, Kerry Fear, stands up on a Friday morning in rainy December saying how she is pre-teaching vocabulary to make reading accessible in the subject of PE, and then that facilitates progress within the subject of PE. And those check-ins and making sure that reading is always on that agenda, it's always that focus. And we are really lucky with the staff in Fitzalan, in some ways, in that they will take on board with very little sell that obviously reading helps all subjects, and reading needs to be the forefront of any curriculum. So it was quite easy, I suppose, in terms of prioritising, but just making sure that those things were in place so that it was always in conversations for people across the school.
I'd add to that, like we're quite lucky that our like year 7, year 8, and year 9 like English groups are like also their form groups as well, which I think like Paige, as Amy mentioned, did an amazing job with the form reader. It wasn't just like, let's just buy 100 odd books, give them to all the form teachers, they can just read them. She's like chunked the text up with like context and PowerPoints to go with it, and like ask questions at points where forms could stop, so it doesn't make it one form's finished in like a week and another form's got like hasn't even started it. It's like they all follow a rhythm that picks up, because we had a 2-week timetable with 3 weeks of 3 lessons of English one week, 4 lessons of English the other week. But those year 7, 8, and now year 9 students are going to be picking up the extra reading time in form with the class reader. It's been, I think she's done a great job with it.
And how long are those sessions then? The form tutor reading time?
So I think it happens twice a week. On a Monday, we have an hour of form terms with some assemblies, and it's only about like 15. It's the same as English, really, about 15, 18 minutes or so of reading. So they get through a small bit of it, but the idea is they start in September, and we've timed the books to sort of finish by like May. So like they're not going to finish too soon if they go all the way through. But I just think, yeah, it's reading that collective book, which doesn't really happen. Like a lot of texts are studied in parts, but that kind of collective reading as a class, and that'll be the PE teachers doing it, that'll be the science teachers doing it, that'll be the math teachers. I guess that builds into that whole school ethos.
And it's also that opportunity to be read to, as well as reading their own book in their hands. It's in secondary school in particular, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's something like 75% of the cohort of secondary school age pupils are no longer read to. But it's the same statistic, around 75%, that say they actually really enjoy being read to. And it's something that they miss from childhood if they were, you know, the bedtime story that they perhaps will have had in whatever language. And then having that opportunity to sit and listen and digest a story is really important and helps their reading fluency and helps their comprehension of stories no end. So again, yes, that form reader time and the form tutors that took that on so willingly as well, using it within that time frame to engage pupils and start their day off on a good note, you know, getting them immersed in an experience or escape to a place that that perhaps they'd rather be.
And I'd add to that, I think like the students, like the teachers in science and maths and PE, whatever, I think they feel supported because the PowerPoint's there as a structure. They know somebody's read through this book and there are certain points that are being made in this PowerPoints every week where they can hang their context on. So they don't have to have also read the book in advance of reading it. They can just go with the flow as well. I think that's really helpful. It took a lot of work, but it's really helpful.
I think that's a really useful message, because I know that, you know, lots of schools in the region they see the value and the importance of reading, and very often kind of tutor time reading might be a first step to getting staff buy-in. But we've had lots of queries and lots of conversations about, you know, how do you raise staff confidence? Because for lots of staff, reading aloud and, you know, the expression and that sort of drama around you know, reading high quality fiction, that's just not in their wheelhouse, and they need some of that support and some of that reassurance that you've talked about. Absolutely. Just to go back to the spotlight again, actually, and another phrase that really stands out is that idea of sort of relevance, and the comment that appreciating that reading has a place in many aspects of life. I think that, you know, your anecdote about the head of PE and you know, you mentioning, James, their sort of science and other subject teachers. I'm also really interested in how you've promoted that breadth of reading and reading that's relevant to everyone, not just to kind of enthusiasts for fiction.
I think it comes down to, again, the subject expertise and empowering staff to perhaps go away and think about, well, I've become an expert at reading in my subject, but what is it that makes reading in my subject an expertise? So for example, how do you read like a historian? Do you just read it as a story, or you're reading with curiosity? And how do you teach that reading with curiosity? And that again is underpinned by those sort of accountable reading strategies. What are you doing when you're reading? Are you questioning a text? Are you thinking about the author, the writer behind the text? What might their views be politically or in the context? And again, that lends itself really well to English teaching, selfishly, but again, it could then help them be curious and have a curious mind in science or in another subject where that questioning of the text that we would do as proficient readers, as good readers, because we, no matter what subject you go into, no matter what profession, you're going to need to read to understand what the fundamentals are. And so I think that some of our strategies certainly have helped to empower staff thinking about reading more, and the whole school prioritisation also helps to have those conversations around reading that then transcend into the classroom.
On a very basic technical level, like if you have catalogued your library collection well and they are all consistent and all your books are consistently tagged with the same things, you can then group all of your science books, all of your maths books into like one handy list, tag it to a QR code, drop that to the science department for posters in communal spaces, and then students can just scan it and see what kind of books they can take out and borrow for free. And you can remind students that the library is like kind of there across all subjects as well.
In an ideal world, wouldn't it be lovely if every scheme of learning came with you could read this to supplement this scheme of learning, and wouldn't that be lovely?
I'll add it to the list.
And on that note, then, with sort of that independence and fostering independent readers who have got the tools to make the right decisions about texts and well-informed decisions about what they're reading, is that something that you see? Is that, are you generating those independent readers, would you say?
It's definitely something that we're beginning to see more. I think that self-direction in reading is definitely something that we see in many pupils, not all pupils, and it's something that is a goal, definitely, having pupils go and look for books that they're interested in. I think when we've done a lot of work around accessibility as well, and making sure that we're not just using text that we might have done previously. We know that pupils' literacy levels are lower than in previous years, and so it would be remiss of us to not have texts that are accessible as well as relevant. So that accessibility is sometimes, I think, for pupils been a barrier in self-directing, because they may well go and pick something up that then is simply not achievable for them at that point. So I think James, again, has done some work around that in the library, and with the programme that we use, having them know, oh, this is my range of books, so I can self-direct within that range. And that's really powerful as well, giving them a choice, not saying this is the book that you need to read because you are reading at that level. They have a range of books. And again, I'm sure James will talk about this in a second, but it's having the number of books within a range that they can self-direct, and they can opt for different genres, different ideas within text.
So again, like that all came from kind of doing a statistical analysis of our stock, and seeing like, okay, well, we have like this many students who have a reading age of this. Do we have the stock to support them? And are the texts simply sometimes too long? Like, you know, reading stamina is a big thing. It's always, it doesn't shock me anymore, but it did shock me when I first started like 8 years ago. And it's the same, I think, pretty much everywhere. Like the reading stamina, students take out a big book to start with, but they do struggle with it, right? They do struggle because attention spans are sort of changing, I feel. And so like maybe like 20, 30 pages get read, then the book gets, I'm doing air quotes, boring. It just gets, just because characters get a little bit more complex. You have to lean into the other side of it and have, okay, well, if students are struggling, we need to support them with slimmer text, but that doesn't mean they're less valuable or less high quality. It means that like you can select those amazing, maybe like reworked Shakespeare, reworked classics, and just give them that cultural capital, whilst also making it manageable for them. But again, the more slim books you have, the more expensive it becomes. It is a sort of yeah, it is something that has to be supported by the school, which has been here.
And I mean, it's so interesting just listening to both of you talk about, on the one hand, that sort of love of reading, which I think is probably part of every school's ambition, isn't it, an aspiration, but underneath that really careful planning and that sort of consideration of, you know, some of that is based on hard data, isn't it? Some of it's very careful consideration of reading habits and balancing guidance with an element of choice. You've also talked, I think, about that very careful structuring to support staff becoming confident role models of reading. So I think that really strikes me as that overall ambition, but within that, the very careful sort of sequencing and careful planning to allow learners to reach that ambition and that culture of reading that we were talking about.
It's having the space to do that as well, and the support from SLT ultimately, who see the problem and address it and want to address it as well.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. A huge thank you to those listening. I know you'll have taken an awful lot from Amy and James's experiences and thoughts with us here. Lots of the message that we've heard from Fitzalan are supplemented by a range of CSC resources, including evidence-informed approaches to reading. There's a recent webinar series, the Developing a Rigorous Reading Curriculum assignment. All of those can be found on the CSC website, and you're always welcome to get in touch if anything that you heard in the conversation today sparks your interest, or you've got any follow-up questions. We're always here to support. Any final words from yourselves, James or Amy?
I haven't managed to say, but like we sort of do a library lesson, but it's a bit of a idiosyncratic library lesson. We call them escape sessions. So every 2 weeks, year 7 and 8, and year 9 have them a little bit, but year 7 and 8 especially, I sort of find a book that isn't really like curriculum related, but we just read it for pleasure. So what we do is I sort of create a little PowerPoint, and it's like a half hour, like a sort of hey on why author talk almost. And we sort of go into the room. So the students don't come to the library because the library is quite a big open space. It's quite hard to create an atmosphere in there, one of like where everyone's quite quiet because there's walkways and things. But we sort of turn the lights off, plug my laptop in, and we sort of deliver a bit of context. So one of my favorite ones I've got is like, I've got this book, Kafka for Kids. And there's a retelling of like the metamorphosis, but you dig into like who Franz Kafka was just for like 10 minutes, why he's sort of considered a great writer, and kind of the themes that the students should look out for in the book. We read the book, usually takes about 15 minutes or so to read the book, and do a little discussion afterwards, and then that's it. It's just we don't expect anything of the students to write it down, to kind of like engage in that way. It's just a case of sit back, curtains down, lights off, just enjoy the story for half an hour. And I think like that has helped again a lot as well, just because I sometimes get a cheer when I go in, but I know that's more about the fact that you have to do work and his pen's down and they're about to do an essay, but then I walk in, and that happens every 2 weeks.
I love that intentionality. Sorry, Amy. No, over to you.
I've been in quite a few of those, and that one in particular was wonderfully weird, and the pupils really enjoy, and they do sort of leave very enthused. Another thing is that we sometimes it's not popular, but we don't shy away from incentivizing reading as well, making sure we are hoping to build confident readers. We are hoping to build young people who want to go and get books, but sometimes the reward of having their name in lights. James creates PowerPoint where the prevalent readers from the previous week, those who have consistently been maintaining accuracy in terms of their reading, and their quizzing on their reading, and having that sort of reward system there is beneficial for pupils to then get in the routine, get in the good habits that we definitely want them to get.
Andy, could I leave you with one question? And for your listeners as well, do you think that every student having 2 paperbacks to read over the year is a fair amount?
Oh, interesting.
If the answer is yes, you've just agreed to a budget of £15 per pupil for your whole school. So if you had a school of 1,000 pupils, you've agreed to a budget of £15,000 annually for your library. That is the Chartered Institute of Library Professionals guidance on what library budgets should be. And quite often libraries are scraping by with £200, £100, whatever the PTA can raise. But we need the conversation to be very different and start from a much higher place.
That's so brilliantly sort of encapsulates that combination of romance around reading and ambitions of reading, and actually, the kind of brass tacks and the tough reality that we need in place to get there. Thanks again, both. Lots to leave us thinking about and considering, and a really worthwhile 35-40 minutes of everybody's time, I'm sure. Thanks very much again.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.